Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy is the fourth installment in the Bridget Jones series. As we said on Double Take, the second Bridget Jones film has the highest box office UK opening weekend, and this film has just beaten it.
So for a rom-com.
For a rom-com, yes, thank you. So it's interesting that they're sort of beating their own records here. Huge series that's been running for quite a long time. This film picks up years after, and this is not a spoiler, it's not a spoiler, it's said in the trailer, years after the sad death of Mark Darcy, who was played by Colin Firth. We pick up 4 years later. Bridget Jones is still very much hurting. She's still being treated by lots of friends in that same way you are when you've lost someone, very sympathetic. And she's slightly classic Bridget Jones fashion. She's barely keeping it all together, saying the wrong thing, stumbling around, but she would quite like to jump back into work, into her role as the TV producer, which we'll get into because it's very funny the way in which they portray what an actual TV producer does. And along the way, she bumps into Rockstar, who's played by Leo Woodall, who you'll know from One Day, very charming, who's much, much younger than her. They bump into each other at a fun little meet-cute in Hampstead Heath, and he has to rescue her and her kids from a tree. Similarly, she is interacting with Shuatel Ejiofor's Mr. Wallaker, who is the teacher for her children at school. And Bridget is balancing whether or not she needs to take care of herself first, put her children first, put her career first, and we are here along the way to catch up with her years later. That's probably all you need to know for the plot. And I will just say, like, anything to do with that death is very much in the opening and part of the trailer. So don't worry, we'll keep everything spoiler-free for the rest of the film. But George, you actually recently watched for the first time most of the Bridget Jones films?
So I'd seen Bridget Jones 1, and then over Christmas I rewatched Bridget Jones 1, and then 2 and 3, which I put in a bonus special we did at the beginning of the year.
Go and check that out if you haven't seen it already.
It's the same episode as I watched Titanic for the first time.
Oh, nice.
Check that back out.
I did 1 and 2 over the December period, which was nice to be
I actually will say I'm really glad I rewatched them recently because there are so many little details that I will talk about that have been consistent throughout all.
And worth noting that, so Bridget Jones' Diary 1 came out in 2001, Bridget Jones' Edge of Reason 2004, so only 3 years later. But then we didn't get Bridget Jones' Baby till 2016, which is 12 years later, and then this 9 years later. So there's a bit of a gap. It's a character you could almost say we've grown up with a little bit as Brit. But straight into Mad About the Boy, George. How did you get on with it?
Yeah, I loved it. I think it's great, and I actually think it's a real triumph. A triumph because not only is it a film that is warm and moving and funny, when I actually sat and thought about everything this film wanted to do, it succeeded in everything it wanted to do. And it seems strange to talk about a film like Bridget Jones and be like, wow, it's a major success, it's a huge triumph. It's a huge, it's a mainstream romantic comedy. But actually, if you think about the objectives of what it wants to pull off, it absolutely nails it. I think not only is it the best Bridget Jones sequel, coming out of it, I have a feeling it might be the best Bridget Jones film. I love the original, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And they are two very different films. The first one is so light and so fun and really joyous. And this is so different, being grounded in grief and aging. But the performances, the writing, everything, the execution about this fourth film just works. And to run that gamut between having one scene have you crying and the next scene have you laughing, it's just perfect. I think it's, having rewatched the first 3 films recently, I think this is the first Bridget Jones film, but the first Bridget Jones sequel. I think this is the first Bridget Jones sequel to get her right since the first one.
Yeah,
I watched this and I was like, this really does feel like Bridget from the first film. I have this thing where, basically, to recap, I love the first one. The second two, the Bridget Jones' Edge of Reason and Bridget Jones' Baby, I found to be quite silly, quite thin.
They feel like sequels, don't they?
Yeah, they feel like sequels, and they kind of turn Bridget into a very ditzy, kind of flustered, reactive character. Actually, even though Bridget is a little bit of a mess and doesn't have everything together, she's quite fun to be around. She's quite cool, and I get that. And I think it's important to say that Bridget Jones is Mad About the Boy. It's based off of a Helen Fielding book directly, which Bridget Jones's Baby and Edge of Reason I don't think were. And I think that really comes through. It's just got great dramatic bones. I love that this franchise has kind of existed for this long, because it's got to the point now where there are references and callbacks to the previous films that I think are really beautifully done. And aging this character, developing this character now 24 years later makes complete sense. There is a moment where her son wears the Christmas jumper that Mark Darcy wears at the very first scene of Bridget Jones. That she goes shopping for condoms, and one of the condom brands is the Dolphin Eco condoms from the third one, which of course broke and caused her to have Bridget Jones's baby. You have returning characters like Emma Thompson's gynecologist and Sarah Solomini's TV presenter, but there are smaller things as well. You have like a couple at a dinner at the beginning of the film, with the same couple played by the same two actors that were in the first film. Celia Imrie is in one scene on FaceTime, but they get her back for that. They get Claire Skinner back as the character Magda, who is in one scene in the first film. They get her briefly back in this for one scene, and it's just, I really like that attention to detail. But I really did sit there and think, this is so pitched perfect. I really did. I think it's fun. I think it's warm. I think it's intelligent. I think it's smart. I think everyone in our screening room was just enjoying it. And to say that as well, it was so busy. I'd never seen a screening room as busy as this since like peak MCU. I was away from when Wicked came out. Maybe it was the same.
Or Barbie even, I'd say.
Oh, Barbie. Yeah, that's true actually. But I was worried that people wouldn't settle down. I thought you'd have loads of chatters, but people really focused into this film. And I had that wonderful feeling where the whole room laughs at one moment, and then the whole room falls quiet and gets emotional at other moments. I think it's great. I think it could be the best Bridget Jones film.
It's interesting you talk about wondering if people would settle down, because I feel like as soon as I start, or within like 10, 15 minutes if I started watching it, I was like, whoa, this tone is completely different to any other Bridget Jones film, let alone similar to the first. There's a specific scene early on where she's walking around her house and she's hearing sort of the voices of all of the people in her life talk to her, and it's a one take that sweeps through the house and all the characters basically get masked in and out of the shot to show you that they're not really here. The tone is so different, and I was like, wow, this is really trying to achieve something completely different to all the other things. We talk about the other films being very sequely, and I think if I'm to talk very broadly about the rom-com space in cinema right now, I think everyone's really struggled to capture the same thing that rom-coms had in the noughties and the 90s. Something has changed. Maybe it's the cinematography is different, maybe the tone is different, maybe we're more cynical, but I think a lot of films have failed to recapture what made those rom-coms great, and it's probably a failure to evolve. And so this film isn't as light-hearted. It's still funny, but it's about something completely different. And I was really aware of the fact that I really felt like I knew Bridget Jones, and I felt so much more attached to this character who's loved and who's lost and who I know really well now. So I love that it's a love letter to Northwest London, a place that I grew up. There are literal streets where me and Talia had some of our first dates there, like by that tree, a place that really meant to me, like shooting at the Spaniards Inn, even though they turned the corner and were on a completely different part of Hampstead, I was twitching. But one thing I really noticed is how much this film, and the other films had this a bit, they shot intimacy in a really distinct way, not just with Leah Woodall and Bridget, but also with Darcy and with Hugh Grant. All of them, the camera stayed really close to them when they embraced, and it was like, I want to get really in between these characters, which is not something that the film did before. And I felt so much closer to Daniel Cleaver, so much closer to Mr. Darcy, and so much closer to Bridget, and I had this like newfound love and respect for her, and that was just a really nice feeling to have. I'd say like the plot for me at sometimes meandered a bit slightly, and I think when we went on the geography field trip, I was a little bit like, where are we going here? How is this going to loop down? We need to connect certain characters together. I think there were certain characters whose romance was developed, and then it was all of a sudden sort of abandoned slightly, and I almost thought, hold on, that all happened very quickly. Now we're moving on to the next thing. So that was there, but it totally broke my heart a couple of times in a way that I just really didn't expect it to. And yeah, it's really different. It's trying to do something else. It's not trying to be a sequel. It's trying to really be an honorary catch-up with this character, and I had a lovely time with it.
When I came out, I said, I think you could, honestly, the Bridget Jones franchise could be 1 and 4. I really think you could strip out the middle two films and just watch them, and then they would make complete sense. Really, and because the other three are so fresh in my mind, those first two sequels they just are really silly. And like I was comparing the scenes, I was like, this is so much better about something real. The emotional maturity of the story, that's just what I really like. And maybe it's because we're getting older as well, but even from the beginning, Daniel Cleaver as a character is still really funny and still really sleazy and Daniel, for goodness sake. But one of his very first lines in the film is even he's showing emotional maturity, because he hugs Bridget Jones.
The first thing he does is like comes to help and support.
He hugs Bridget really and he says, I know this is a terrible day for you. And I'm like, that's your character's even evolving now.
Yeah. And like a love and appreciation for someone you've known a really long time, and that really resonated with us. It's like, oh yeah, that's how Daniel Cleaver would behave to Bridget.
Yeah, because they've known each other. Yeah. And I love that also, Hugh Grant is not in the film much. He's an and Hugh Grant on the titles, but the his involvement that's been trailed in the trailer and everything is kind of just in the first 5 minutes, and you do get more of him that isn't shown. I'm glad that we got more Hugh Grant that hasn't just been revealed straight away. I think Renee Zellweger was great. There was, even though obviously the premise is about Colin Firth's character having passed away, I thought they were going to slip in one more scene with Colin Firth, like one more flashback or something like that.
It's very light touch.
It's very light touch, and I actually think that's great. Even though part of me thought we as audiences actually haven't had that much time to see them as a family, I think that's exactly the point. He remains a kind of ghostly presence. He remains a presence that you long for. And
when he's used, I think he really sneaks up on you.
Yeah, but he really is used
there he
sparingly.
is.
Really like. And but the warmth that comes through underneath it, it's just this great layering of grief on top of warmth, on top of friendship, and the. I love that they've still got the three friends from the original.
Really sweet. And they're still the same characters.
Yeah, Sally Phillips and James Callis and Shirley Henderson, and they are all the same, and then they're together. And I think the film ends on a really great note, and I do think it kind of tries to draw the franchise to a conclusion, and it says, "This is it. This is the end of Bridget Jones's story." And I love the way it finished.
I love their house as well.
Well, the house is like Paddington-esque, isn't it?
It's Paddington-esque, but it's like a Hampstead version of it. It's definitely fancy, but not flashy in like a new money way. It's like a beautiful
homey,
house
cutesy,
at home in Hampstead, but it's like got crap and nubbins and crayons everywhere because there's kids.
Maybe, but not.
Do you know what? It's sad, but it's still lighthearted and easy to watch. But I think you put it on for a very different reason than you put on the first.
I think also we spoke recently about Baby Girl and how great that was for showing middle-aged women's sexual desire.
Similarly,
this is the same. This is just the same. It's not as it's not pushing trying to push boundaries like Baby Girl is, but it's still important that in a mainstream film that gets a lot of time, gets a lot of credit, and it isn't yet done in the silly. Jokey way that it is in Bridget Jones's Baby. This is different. You just say it's much more intimate. It gets much closer. I really love it.
Weight and her being fat, thankfully,
Thank
she's
God,
never
she's
been
never
fat
been at all.
But what's really like sort of easy to resonate with Bridget is that she, at every stage of her life, has always just been barely holding it together, which is something that's a really universal feeling, especially when you've got young kids who are getting older and talking now. They demand more from you as a mother.
Great kids, by the way. Great kid actors.
Great kids. Also very like upper middle class problems. Like, I got a nanny and it's all been sorted in my Hampstead mansion. What a lovely way to live, and I'll go back to work. Speaking of back to work, the way they film what a TV producer does with their job is just completely ridiculous.
Really?
Yeah, well, it's like she comes into work and it's like problem solving of how to get a stain out of trousers, and she's like, "Look at me, I'm back at work." It's like, that's not what they do. They don't just run around having conversations.
I think it's terrific. I really do. I really think it's an achievement. I think that's the thing. It just absolutely succeeds in what it's trying to do. I think it's a real shame this has only been released to streaming in the US. It's been released straight onto Peacock. I get if the US never got Bridget, but I just think this is such a great film. And for me, I think collapse the franchise. It goes 1 and 4. Watch them back to back.
Make good money, George. Probably come back in 5-6 years.
But I hope it.
I will say, I think if you're looking for what you got out of 1 and maybe 2, which was like the love triangle and the sparky chemistry between Hugh Grant, Renee Zellweger, and Colin Firth, and that dynamic, I don't think that is here in the same way. But as we've said, I think the film is actively trying to achieve something very different. It's trying to tell a different story. So I think if you're holding out for that, you'll find it's missing. You'll find that the dynamic between Bridget and Leo Woodall isn't the same. It's something very different.
I also like that in the marketing of the film, they've tried to position it that like it's this love triangle with these love rivals of Leo Woodall and Chiwetel Ejiofor. They're completely different chapters in Bridget's life. I'm glad it didn't go down a very generic route from what the trailer sets up to be of like, she's got men on either hand, which one is she? And it's like, no, those are explored in different chapters in different ways in her life. Like a natural flow, It wasn't this sort of contrived romantic comedy setup. I think it's great, and if you're American, you listen to this and you can't see it at the cinema, go get Peacock for a week or something and watch it.
But we would love to hear your thoughts. Guys, if you have seen Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy, and you want to send in your reviews, your thoughts, your questions, your concerns, you can do by sending them in to hello@pulpkitchenpodcast.com. Just like Freddie did. Freddie writes into the show and says, "Hi lads, love the pod. Like you, I'm a casual fan of the Bridget Jones series. Cozy and fun, but inconsistent and hardly masterpieces. Well, I can't believe I'm saying this. Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy is, I think, the best in the series.
There you
and
go.
now my top film of the year so far.
Yeah, me too.
Saw it last night in a packed cinema, and I've never seen such a mix of emotions in an audience, crying, laughter, and everything in between. From the opening scenes, I knew we were in good hands. The jokes came thick and fast, sadly not quite as crude as the previous installments, but the wit was still there. And it was a delight to see the full returning cast, particularly Hugh Grant, who actually had some interesting material to work with and gave a surprisingly nuanced performance. It felt that Bridget had been brought into this decade. She retains her character, but is no longer the butt of the joke, does what she wants, and no longer obsessed with her weight. Yeah, right said. But what impressed me most was the film's depiction of grief. My wife's mum died unexpectedly 4 years ago, the same time span as Mark Darcy in the film. So grief is something I've come to see up close recently. It's often depicted in films as sort of 1 year and then your better situation. What this film showed is that even years later, it can be a struggle, but that you learn to live with and around your grief, and you can still find a good in every day. You muddle through as best you can, and things slowly get easier. We both agreed afterwards that it was an astonishingly real depiction of grief. The first film we've seen to frame it in this way. It was so refreshing. Similarly, the way the children in the film talked about their dad really rang true. I honestly think this film will help a lot of people who find themselves or a loved one grieving. It shows that it will take time, but there is a path through, and will remind people they aren't alone. This one was so much better than it had any right to be. It's certainly no Anora, but it doesn't need to be. And I think that this amount of jokes, heart, and positive message, it should stand the test of time. And it certainly rises above the other films. Keep up the good work on the pod. You deserve every success. Freddie from London. P.S. If you choose between Bridget's house in this film and the Browns' house in Paddington, which one are you going for? I'm a sucker for the Hampstead look, so I'm the former. But I agree with you on the beauty stairs in the Browns' house, so maybe I'd nab those.
They do seem very similar. The Paddington one does have great stairs, but the Bridget one seems more livable as a space.
I take the Bridget Hampstead. I know that road that was shot on. That's right off of Hampstead Heath, not far from the Freemasons' Arms. It's a lovely, lovely part of the world.
I totally agree with everything you've said, Freddie. That's it. It's just it's so much better than it has any right to be. And yet when you said like, oh, it's not Anora, yeah, because it's not trying to be. It's trying to be a Bridget Jones film, and every single thing it tries to do, it succeeds. I think it's a real accomplishment, and I love it. I do. It has been one of those things. I came out of the cinema and I thought, I need to speak to people about have they seen it yet. So I messaged my mum. I was like, have you been to see Bridget Jones yet? Because it is a really, really good film.
It'll be a good example to put forward as a film that's even if there have been sequels in between, it's still a film following up a film that came out 24 years later. Like, this is how you evolve and change and readapt your film for a modern audience to make it relevant and about something else.
Did you worry that there were a couple of times where Hugh Grant sounded a little too much like Boris Johnson?
He does a bit.
There was a couple of times I thought,
He is posh, though. That is kind of his.
Yeah, but a couple of times it was a little too...
But yeah, like
but he was very
Notting
good,
Hill, he never sounded like Boris.
No, I know, but now he's older. I guess he's
a little bit, sort of the lips sort of carry on.
Yeah, well, very naughty man. But it was, he has some great lines in it.
Well, he was just like interacting with all the different characters, like with the kids. He's teaching them to make cocktails. It's very funny.
Thank you, Freddie, for that. Go see it, guys. Absolutely love this film.